Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Voice. This is the evolution of the Citizen Voice bulletin that we have that came out of the Citizen Sentinels newsletter. So I welcome you to our presentation. I'm Dennis Jamison, the founder of the Citizen Sentinel Network. And we are moving our programs to Monday. If you actually are tuned in, you would know that. Unfortunately, we found that Friday was not necessarily the best time for people to view a live video presentation. So we're experimenting, and we're putting this on Monday afternoons now at this point. This is a new time slot from Pacific time is 1:30 to 2, and from the East Coast it would be 4:30 to 5. Hopefully it'll be a better time. I want to thank our sponsors, Citizen Sentinel Network and the Lightwing Mission. The essence is that anybody can be a Citizen Sentinel, and we would hope that other Citizen Sentinels will be able to support the program through financial contributions if you can. We're going to get into Columbus, and this will probably be the last presentation that I'm going to be making on Columbus, since this is supposed to be a true U.S. history course. But since the progressive revisionists and people like Howard Zinn started with Columbus, who really didn't set foot on the North American continent, we'll start our program dealing with Columbus. So last time we were talking about Columbus is in the New World, which he didn't really necessarily understand that it was a new world. He felt that he was in an area of Asia, and he thought that he was going to Cathay. So he's there in the New World exploring these islands, and he meets these people that he determines that are Indians. Indian meaning these people were from the land of India, and ultimately the islands that are there off the coast of India, so ultimately calling them the West Indies. So he sees these people, the Taino. He sees that when he meets them, they're not wearing much clothing, and he can see that they bear scars. There's scars on their outer bodies, and even though they can't speak the same language, he tries to explain that he's concerned about the scars. What, were they scarring themselves or whatever? And the Taino explained to him that there's other Indian tribes, and ultimately these Indian tribes are the more dominant tribe. This tribe is the one that is enslaving the Taino and the Arawakan. It is called the Carib, which basically the Carib Indians were the reason that they named this area the Caribbean or the Caribbean Sea area. These islands are in that area. So Columbus is exploring these islands and essentially, traveling around, sailing around, exploring these islands in the Caribbean Sea. If you look at this map closely that Spencer will put up eventually, down in the bottom corner of this, I was trying to show this, but I had the wrong map last week. There is this area just above where it says the Caribbean Sea, just next to that. This is all today, it's Venezuela. And so this area, the Orinoco River Valley, is where the Carib Indians came from. And the anthropologists and archaeologists have determined this, partly through pottery, similar types of pottery that was discovered in the other islands of the Caribbean. So he is aware of the other Indians who are much more fierce. They use poison darts. They are cannibals. And so he is a little bit aware of another type of tribe that is more the dominant tribe, whereas the Arawakan and the Taino Indians are not as fierce. They're not as warlike, and perhaps much more docile and much more peaceful. Columbus does make an entry into his journal that has become very famous and picked up by a lot of the progressive revisionist historians, that essentially these people would make good slaves. However, the dominant conversation is how loving and how kind and how generous these people are. The overall situation here is there are two perspectives that need to be presented rather than one, and one perspective is never enough. Unfortunately, what I was explaining last time is that the ship ran aground that he was using as his flagship, called the Santa Maria. It was the largest ship and therefore difficult to pull off of the island. He tried to utilize the services of all of his men, all of the Indian people. The chieftain, was willing to have his Indian people come out and push the ship. They tried to have the ship pulled off by the one other ship that they had available, one of the caravels, but it didn't work. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't pull the Santa Maria off the island. So in essence, he determined that he was going to take apart the ship. This picture here I made reference to last time. It's when Vasco da Gama, the sailor for Portugal, put his ship on ground on purpose to essentially service the ship, to repair it. We would call this dry dock today, but he did this on purpose. Columbus didn't do it on purpose, and he couldn't get the ship off the island, and so therefore he took it apart plank by plank. And in the journals, he talks about it as a fortress. And of course, the progressive revisionist historians will make note of, they built a fortress. The illusion is that there were, soldiers with Columbus, and of course they had to have a fortress to protect themselves from the Indians, these savage Indians that they didn't like. This is the farthest thing from the truth. They built the La Navidad, which was the town or the village right next to the Indian encampment, and essentially these people were friends. And one of the biggest problems, though, is that, as I said earlier, the Indians did not wear much clothing. It's Caribbean, right? And so that meant both men and women didn't wear much clothing. And one of the things that Columbus said, one of the last things he said before he left to go back to Spain, because he has one less ship, the largest ship, he had to leave 38 to 40 people on the island, which were the primary crew of the Santa Maria. He said, don't mess with the Indians. And as I explained last time, it was most likely because these sailors, if you have to think of a sailor who's out at sea for a long time, and what they do for recreation when they find a port. Well, you can put two and two together yourself. It's one of the reasons why he said, don't mess with the Indians. Unfortunately, they may have messed with the Indians. They may have done things that the Indians did not feel were right with the Indian ladies. The essence here is that when Columbus left these people, his intent was that he was leaving them to come back and essentially to return with other Spaniards at this point to be able to essentially colonize the islands. And this is, the idea. And I want to explain. The deal that Columbus made with the King of Spain was basically that he would be governor of all the lands that he could claim in the name of Spain. So he has a vested interest here. He's also has a vested interest because he would like to make a lot of money on the endeavor. Not only the King of Spain would like some kind of return on the investment, but Columbus is also going to get a piece of the action. He's going to get some portion of the wealth that the king is able to get from these islands or whatever lands that they are claiming. Now, the original intent was not to dominate the islands. The idea was that if he goes to Cathay, Cathay was a kingdom or an empire in and of itself. Columbus thought that, the great Khans would be in charge of Cathay. He had a letter in his breast pocket from the King of Spain, King Ferdinand, to open up trade negotiations with the King of Cathay. But obviously, by the time that Columbus set sail, China had reclaimed China from the Mongolians at that point. So there was a different reality in China than Columbus even imagined. So Columbus has a predicament here. He has to leave these sailors, these people, but as I mentioned before, it was very likely that these were the majority of the prisoners that were released from the prisons by the special decree from King Ferdinand. So there's another reason why he said he would say, don't mess with the Indians. Knowing criminals, knowing prisoners to be prisoners or criminals, it's very likely that those individuals would take responsibility into their own hands to do whatever they really wanted to do. He had to go back to Spain, and he met King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He had to write a letter, formal letter, to let them know that he was back, and then they invited him into the court. I mentioned the other day that the King of Portugal, because he set up in the dock of Lisbon, and everybody came out to see, the sailor who crossed the ocean. But the King of Portugal wanted to see Columbus because they didn't believe that he actually sailed across the ocean. They felt that he had sailed to New Guinea and claimed the islands that belonged to the King of Portugal in the name of the King of Spain. So they had to clarify some things at that point, and Columbus was able to get out of that situation. But nobody really believed Columbus truly in that point in time. And I'm sure that King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were a little bit surprised to see that this guy Columbus had returned. Not only he had returned with gold, he had returned with these indigenous people. And many of them, contrary to what the progressive revisionist historians would like you to believe, many of them wanted to go back on the ship with Columbus. Some of them got pretty sick and died on the journey because it was a difficult situation. They had never been accustomed to sailing across the ocean. But he did manage to bring some of these people back into the court of the King of Spain. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella met with Columbus at that point in time, and then seeing, what they saw, seeing these people, seeing the gold that he brought, it created visions of grandeur, and it initiated a gold rush that probably was a very powerful, but essentially ignored as a gold rush in history. But 17 ships came back across the ocean with Columbus. The overall situation is I don't think they needed to put out any, brochures for a nice Caribbean vacation. The main thing was that they were looking for gold. They were looking also secondarily for land. The king was claiming this land, didn't matter whether it was the emperor of China or not. But these islands, probably they didn't realize that, they did belong to somebody. Nobody asked the indigenous population at that point in time. But Columbus essentially is in the court, and he's actually getting very clear instructions from the king and the queen. He's given a new set of instructions because now he is becoming more formally an agent of Spain in the process. When they go back, however, there is a problem. The problem is that when they go back to La Navidad, which is where he built the village, they find the dead bodies of all the Spaniards there in front of the village. Now, this is a shock. Columbus was shocked by this, and he couldn't understand this. He went to Guacanagari, who was the chieftain at that point, the sachem in the village, sachem for many, many tribes in that area. But they never got a clear indication of what really happened. In other words, if CSI was investigating this crime of the massacre of all 40 of these people, they would have never found a proper answer. Now, part of the problem is that one of the Indians that Columbus was trying to get a clear answer from lied. Oh my goodness, are you kidding me? Indians would lie? Oh, no, that doesn't fit the progressive revisionist narrative. Only white conquerors lie, correct? No. You see, if it doesn't fit the narrative, it doesn't make the history books. And the reality is that Columbus interrogated Guacanagari, who was the chieftain that made friends with him. Columbus felt that he was his friend. When he came down to meet Columbus after he saw the bodies, the guy, Columbus records that he was crying, he was weeping, tears were streaming down his face. He's so sad. And then he questioned this guy's brother, who was another chieftain. And the guy said, no, 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 my brother killed all your people, right? So he never got a straight answer. He did not know. Even when he went to his grave himself, he did not know who killed those Spaniards. But here's a different situation. His thinking was that these people were peaceful. And so his understanding from Guacaganari was that basically it was the Carib Indians who were the ones who were the dominant tribe. They killed all of Columbus's men. And so we don't really know in essence, but it's likely that the Caribs were the ones who killed those Spaniards. However, there is a possibility that the Spanish criminals that were the major contingent of crew on Columbus's ship, the Santa Maria, they did mess around with the Indian ladies, and the Indian men probably did not like that. So there's a couple of different scenarios that we could look at and pursue, but that was in 1492. So we don't know. Now, they did say that the dead bodies probably had been dead for 20 to 30 days. They didn't have somebody who was doing an autopsy there. But the overall situation is that you're talking about conquistadors who fought in the wars on the Iberian Peninsula, and they probably had a good sense of what death was about and how long a body may have been laying on the battlefield. So the massacre occurred. And if you really think about this massacre, the overall situation is that this changes the perspective of all of those Spaniards who came with Columbus. Now, I said on those 17 ships, there were not only the conquistadors, but there were nobles that they needed the conquistadors to protect them. And there were members of the clergy. The church was very interested in what was going on over there as well. And one of the elements that is not really in the secular revisionist history, and yet it did appear in Samuel Eliot Morrison's journals that he depicted of Columbus, is that when they were crossing the ocean, they would pray several times a day on the ship, sometimes every half hour. This was a journey that Columbus felt was something that God inspired him to do. Now, the people who don't believe in God would not want that to come out in the news, right? Or in any journal. So you can't really produce the full intact journals of Columbus if you want to keep your narrative preserved. And this is the problem. Morrison didn't hide stuff. So you don't have the sin of omission from Morrison. He did the best he could based on the translations that were available. But the overall situation, if you were a Spaniard and you saw that, these Spaniards had been killed and their eyes pulled out and eaten by the Caribs, most likely, then it changes the overall situation of what's going on there. You have a hostile environment, and anybody that has ever been in a hostile environment where people are essentially at risk for their very lives, it changes the overall situation, the overall perspective. And you better believe that they probably would have built a fortress on the second journey. Now, there's a bunch of interests that are going on among those people who came with Columbus. The church had their vested interest. The Catholic Church would like to make converts of these friendly, innocent people. The nobles would like to get their hands on the gold and the conquistadors probably would like to gain something from the effort. Now, I want you to understand the reality in Spain after Spain became Spain. It changed from 4 different kingdoms into the nation of Spain. And so the people who were the nobles who fought on the side of the king would reward them with land grants. This is called the feudal system. And the feudal system existed in Europe for quite a long time. Well, what we see happening then in the Caribbean and in Central America and in South America is that the Spaniards basically created colonies and then gave land grants to the upper echelon, the elitists, the nobles who would fight on behalf of the king and fought in the wars against the Moors, but also would fight against these Indians that had killed their countrymen. So it doesn't look like, you know, we're going into these democratic lands and we're founding a nation, you know, one nation under God here. We're not really looking to do that. The dominant reality was it was not the Catholic Church in Spain at the time. Many people misunderstand who dominated who. From 800 AD, the Holy Roman Empire was established under Charlemagne, and the Pope crowned Charlemagne the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. But that was a long time ago. You're talking now 1400s, 1500s. And as I mentioned in one of the broadcasts, it was King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella who created the Spanish Inquisition. The popes had initiated some minor inquisitions, and it was basically to purify the believers, the Catholic faith. And essentially, the king and queen, and they weren't really the two monarchs, they were two separate monarchs of two separate kingdoms at that time. They joined together and they created the Spanish Inquisition, which was essentially part of that war to rid the Iberian Peninsula of the Moors, but it also rid the Iberian Peninsula of Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox people who did not believe according to the Roman Catholic Church. It also rid the Iberian Peninsula of the Jews. So the concept there was you believe in the Roman Catholic Church and the dictates of the church, or you hit the highway. So you would either leave one way or the other in the Iberian Peninsula that Spain claimed to be Spain. You would either leave by your own volition, or you would be placed 6 feet under the ground. So you would leave the territory of Spain one way or the other. So this is the kind of world that Columbus lived in, and the kind of people that were running the Spanish government. And it was amazing because Columbus put himself at the mercy of the Spanish king and queen. Now, that was a mistake. I've written articles on Columbus, and one of my articles is Columbus being a pawn in a king's game. He was certainly a pawn in a king's game. So when he went back in 1496, there were ships going back and forth, and people were giving news of the king to what was going on in the New World at that point in time. But here's a problem. You have an Italian who is supposed to be the governor of the islands, and Columbus put his brothers in charge of some of the areas of the islands as governors as well. So what you have is a situation in which you have Italians lording it over the Spaniards, who are the elite. These are the lords of Spain. These are the royal blue bloods of Spain. And this was not something that was going to last very long. So increasingly, the nobles complained against these idiots who were trying to rule over them. Do you think that has really just left history? Didn't we just experience something where an aristocracy in the United States of America really freaked out over somebody who wasn't part of the elite becoming president of the United States? You see, these things are human issues. And if we look at things from the standpoint of, you know, how human nature can intervene in history, we begin to understand much more deeply. The overall situation is that the nobles began to complain to the Spanish government, and the king realized he had a problem. And so in 1496, when Columbus came back, the king didn't contact Columbus for 2 years. And what was happening? Well, in reality, the king of Spain hired a guy by the name of Amerigo Vespucci, who was working for the Portuguese, to figure out where Columbus had been. And then he basically persuaded Columbus that he needed help being a governor. And so he was going to give him a guy who could help him be governor in Columbus's place. Of course, in Columbus's name, essentially. This guy, his name was Bobadillo. Francisco de Bobadillo was a Spanish nobleman who was one of the most loyal to King Ferdinand in the Iberian Peninsula. He had fought alongside the king during the conquests of the Moors, and so he secretly was able to coerce the king, or the king coerced him one way or the other. They made a great deal of planning, and ultimately Columbus was the minor player in this situation. The king gave Columbus the titles, but when Bobadilla was commissioned, he was giving Bobadilla the title of governor and also the chief inquisitor of Columbus. Bobadilla was the one, after Columbus got the commission to go back in 1498, Bobadilla came on the island, started questioning other people, and ultimately, after a period of time, put Columbus in chains in 1500, arrested Columbus on his third journey. So he arrested Columbus because the crimes that were basically claimed that Columbus had committed, in fact, these are the same claims that the progressive revisionist historians make today against Columbus. So he was imprisoned. They put him in chains, sent him back to Spain, kept him in chains because the king, Columbus thought that the king would come down to the dock and greet him, and he would hold up his hands, showing what the terrible Bobadilla had done to him. But in reality, it was the king of Spain who had done this. Columbus was escorted to the prison, and he stayed in prison essentially for quite a long time. He writes a lament in the prison. Columbus he never really believed that the king was the guy who was behind all of this. And then, he wanted to come to trial, and they had a trial, and all this stuff came out in the trial. And these are the things that are repeated in middle school classes today about how evil Christopher Columbus really is. Now, guess what? Those charges were all dismissed. The whole point of the trial was to essentially strip Columbus of any real reputation that he had at any point in time. It's called character assassination today. So what the king gave Columbus, I guess all he could claim was Admiral of the Ocean Seas, because he was never governor after 1500. And in reality, he had to persuade the king of Spain to let him go back on a fourth journey. You know why he had to persuade him to go back, that he could go back? Nobody believed Columbus was really a good man after this trial. His reputation had been destroyed. Even his own son was not sure whether Columbus did all these things or not. So one of the pleas that Columbus made to King Ferdinand was that at least he could take his son back on his fourth journey. Columbus made 4 journeys. First 2 were exploratory. The third one ended in a tragedy. But then the fourth journey was, he wanted to take his son back across the ocean to be able to show him that what he had told him was the truth, that he had discovered these lands. and that essentially that his son would not forget that he had done these things, that he could carry on his father's legacy at this point. Unfortunate reality is that the Spanish government weaseled or tried to weasel out of paying the family of Columbus, the heirs of Columbus, all the wealth. You can imagine how much wealth Spain, took out of the islands or out of the Caribbean, in the Central American area, South America, incredible amounts of wealth. But they took the Columbus family to court. The Columbus family had to fight to be able to receive any of the promises that the king had made at one point in time. So Columbus was a simple man. He went back to a simple life. He was basically given a little house somewhere in Spain, and he lived out the rest of his days there. It's a tragic story, a pawn in a king's game. I believe that many people may have not heard that story. It's not fits with the narrative that they may have heard of Columbus before. I want to thank you so much for joining us today in today's presentation. As I had mentioned before, we are moving to Monday afternoons, and I hope that more people can join on the Monday sessions. They can actually invite your family and friends and have them come out. I want to thank our sponsors again. I want to thank WCN TV for hosting us. I want to thank Strike Force of Prayer for including us, having us, allowing us to have our links put on their website. And you can catch us also on our Citizen Sentinel network if you missed this program at some point. You can take it in when you have the time. I want to thank everybody for joining today, and hopefully you guys all could have a great Easter. Easter is coming up, and wonderful holiday. Please be safe with your family, with your friends, and God bless you all. Take care.